Hello and welcome into the latest edition of ESPN FC. Kay Murray, Craig Burley and Shaka Hislop here in the studio, continuing to talk about the fallout from Liverpool's League Cup exit to Crystal Palace and Arne Slot's decisions on the team selection that he put out there. He has come under criticism. He insists that his choices were about protecting key players from injury with the games that lie ahead. And this is what he had to say when it was put to him about the inexperienced squad that he did choose to take on Crystal Palace. He said, we don't have such a big squad as people might tell. There was so much focus on the amount of money we spent. People all of a sudden think we have 25 players available, but we mainly have 20 players. Then we have 4 injuries. I only have one right fullback, Connor Bradley, as an example. Every time I had to play him twice in 3 days or 3 times in 7 days last season, I had to take him off with a hamstring injury or something else. Are you willing to take that risk with such a big week coming up? Beth Lindop is now joining us, a Liverpool correspondent, but I can kind of guess what Craig's
No. I mean,
we're just, right,
you know, whenever a team goes on a little bit of a bad run, we start hearing this spiel from managers. I don't think there's going to be a lot of sympathy coming Liverpool's way, bearing in mind they're the current champions of England. They spent a fortune in the summer. Yeah, they've got some injuries. They haven't got the most in the Premier League. You know, you've got Tottenham with 10 injuries at the moment to some key players. You got Fulham with 7 less of a squad. You got Brighton with 7 players out. They're expecting Gravenberg back potentially for the weekend. They are expecting Isak potentially back for the weekend, and so he rested a bunch of his first teamers. And he did play the kids, and we talked about this on Tuesday, I think, Stevie and I. We said we think he'll weaken the team because he's going to be thinking foremost about Aston Villa at the weekend. So I wasn't surprised, and I wasn't surprised Crystal Palace went quite strong because the cup competitions for them have become very important and quite successful, actually, FA Cup and Community Shield. And so that wasn't a surprise, but I think we're already hearing what we're hearing from Arne Slot isn't going to wash, I think, with a lot of people, bearing in mind they have got a big squad and he has got a lot of talent to be able to select from. And no club, no team coming into sort of November, December is sitting there, unless you're the luckiest manager alive, Shaka, is sitting there with, you know, every key player fit and available. Somebody's always dealing with something, and I don't think there's going to be much sympathy whatsoever.
Well, it's not getting any sympathy from me, not the kind of money that Liverpool spent this summer in reinforcing the reigning English champions. Now, all of a sudden, you have a couple of injuries and you're so threadbare that you put the kids out. Now, that being said, this is what Liverpool do. Liverpool play the kids in these competitions. You saw that in both cup competitions last season. You've seen it season on for God alone knows how long. The only difference is the form that Liverpool come into this cup tie in, that Arne Slot is having to answer for, and this, well, it doesn't help. I don't think it affects or should affect them in any way, but Arne Slot answering to that poor form and his selection choices, I just think adds more pressure to the team. I don't feel he needs to answer this. He doesn't need to address it, but for some reason he keeps getting asked about it, and he keeps answering it. And that, for me, is just piling on the pressure on an already under pressure starting 11.
As much has been made, Beth, obviously, with what the guys have mentioned, 450 million spent in the summer, and then us hearing that he doesn't have quite the exact squad that he would need right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not been received particularly well, and I completely understand why. I think the makeup of Liverpool's squad at the moment isn't as balanced as Slot would probably like it to be. Now, he obviously was involved in those transfer decisions in the summer, but he was by far, you know, he wasn't the only one. There's people above him who will have signed off on things and will have sat as a committee and made these decisions. Now, I think at the time when the Mark Gay deal fell through on deadline day, it felt like that was an error from Liverpool's part to let it get to that point where they ended up leaving themselves short. I think that was the big sort of glaring gap in the squad that a lot of people would have liked to have been filled. Now, there was an element of bad luck in the sense that Giovanni Leone, the other centre-back that they brought in, who looked very good on his debut against Southampton in the last round of the Cup, picks up an ACL injury and is now out for the season. So from potentially going into the season with 5 centre-backs, had Gay's deal gone through. They've now got 3. So there is an element with Arne Slot where that he's not wrong. I think there are areas in the squad that could have been bolstered in the summer and weren't. But ultimately, it's the squad that he's got now, and he's got to work with it. But I think in terms of the rotation, and as Craig sort of alluded to earlier, I think regardless of what would have happened last night, the big game and the big games are those 3 coming up: Aston Villa at the weekend, Real Madrid in the Champions League, and then Manchester City. I think regardless of what happened in that cup game, those 3 games would still be massive, and that is obviously where his priorities lie, and that is why he ultimately decided to go with that team that he went for last night. And whether he'll be vindicated for that decision depends on how well Liverpool do over these next 3 games.
They knew they needed a defender in the summer, Craig.
Well, they did to bolster the squad, but that doesn't detract away from the fact that Virgil van Dijk and Ibrahim Konate are not playing well. And you can maybe look at the full-backs outside them, and Kerkez is definitely struggling. But I've mentioned on here many, many times, I don't think Van Dijk's helping him as a captain. I really think he's kind of thrown him under the bus a little bit with his gesticulating to him in front of the crowd. And as a young player, it just drains your confidence. But there's no doubt himself, and particularly Konate, have not played well. For 7 months last year, Liverpool were pretty much flawless domestically. And so was Arne Slot. Whether it was on-field decisions or whether it was press conferences. And we all sat here and said, man, this guy speaks normally. And he speaks pretty truthfully. And he speaks a lot of common sense. And what we're seeing here is a manager who really, for the first time in his Liverpool career as a manager, has been asked a lot of questions. And he is going down the path that a lot of managers go down, where a lot of it's kind of gobbledygook. You know, he talks about the right back and Frimpong's out and having to play Bradley 3 times in a week. You know, Shaka and I were sitting saying, you know, back in the day, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a week. That was the norm. That was the norm. You played on a Saturday, you played on a Wednesday, you played on a Saturday. That's not a big deal. Shouldn't be for these super fit players these days. And also, he's played Szoboszlai there, but also he could put Joe Gomez there. Joe Gomez has played right back 100 times. I know it's not ideal, but you could put Joe Gomez there. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff, I think, here that the manager's just trying to make an excuse. An excuse at the moment because he can't figure it out. He can't work out what his best team is. He's not been able to get Florian Wirtz in the side and working, so he took him out. I think he made a big boo-boo in 2 games, Chelsea and Man United, by playing Alexander Isak ahead of Ekitike. And I think most people shared that sentiment. But let me just tell you one thing. When he went down to Stamford Bridge, Arne Slot with this Liverpool team, and they got played off the park, they got outworked and they got outthought. And they deservedly got beat. Chelsea had 10 injuries that day. Chelsea had double the injuries Liverpool had. Chelsea had a makeshift back 4. Chelsea had 2 centre-halves that I don't think had ever played together, or certainly hadn't played together many times. So they had their own issues. So this is not a Liverpool thing. This is an Arne Slot needs to figure this out, and he needs to figure it out fast. You saw that graphic. Villa, who have 5 on the bounce, including Tottenham away and City at home, so they're finding their feet. Real Madrid, who have just won the Clásico. And Man City, who did have bad defeat at Villa Park, but apart from that, they've been scoring goals for fun. So he has to find a way to figure out all these problems, and he has to do this very, very soon. And stop making the excuses. I don't think it's a good look for him to be making excuses for this Liverpool side.
That's a defining 3 games, Shaka. Is it going to be justified in those decisions that he made in this Carabao Cup game if these go well?
Well, if these go well, to your question, Kay, I do not think that Arne Slot has to justify decisions made in the Carabao Cup. It's the Carabao Cup. Liverpool have played the kids in the Carabao Cup for God alone knows how long. I don't think he needs to answer those questions. Him answering those questions have made it more of an issue than I think it needs to be. The bigger issue, which we've kind of all harped on, is the imbalance of the squad. And while, yes, it would have been great if they got Guehi, they tried to get him, if you recognise that there's a spot to be filled in the centre-back position, why leave it till the 11th hour to try to sign Gahey, and then Glasner threatened, listen, if you sell him, I'm leaving. Now all of a sudden, Crystal Palace pulled the plug on that deal. You had all summer to do this. You chased simultaneously Ekitike and Alexander Isak. You land Ekitike, you still continue to chase Alexander Isak when that was no longer the priority. Surely at that point, once you sign Ekitike, Gahey is the priority. But you complete those two, and now you can't figure out what to do with those two, how to play both of them together. And because you focus on them, you lose out on Gahey. So there's a lot, and I know Slot doesn't take all the responsibility. Yes, other people have to kind of sign off on all of this. But he ultimately is the face of this club, or certainly the face of the players that they sign. And the responsibility will fall on his doorstep first of all. So he has to address that. For me, what happened in the Carabao Cup really does not matter. It really shouldn't. Now, you go and you win these 3 games, nobody's talking about that. It just kind of, but you have a bad time in those 3 games, everybody's focusing on, not the Carabao Cup, but more to the point, the previous games before that you lost and were outplayed in.
Yeah, he's got to get it right now, Beth. It's 6 losses in the last 7 games. What's been the feeling at the club after such a bad run? It does not make for good reading at all.
Doesn't, and I think there is maybe a little bit of a divide at the moment between the online fan base and people on Merseyside. I think that the general sense from the match-going fans is that they're still right behind Slot. There was a number of them who stayed behind last night at the final whistle and they were chanting his name. And I think there is a recognition that despite the fact that an awful lot of money was spent in the summer, you know, it does still sometimes take time for players to gel. Doesn't matter how good you are, if you bring in 6-7 new players and you've got sort of six or seven established starters leaving, as Liverpool did in the summer, and some of those departures, by the way, were out of Liverpool's control. You know, Trent Alexander-Arnold wanted to go to Real Madrid, Darwin Núñez wanted to leave, Luis Diaz wanted to leave, so they had to replace those players. It wasn't a case of Liverpool just saying, right, we're just going to rip up this squad because we want to. It was because they had to replace a number of those players. So I think there's a recognition from a lot of people at Liverpool that is the situation Slot finds himself in with a squad that still needs to gel. I think he also has credit in the bank, obviously, from the title win, and also from the way that he handled what was obviously an incredibly difficult event over the summer with the loss of Diogo Jota as well. So I think all of those things mean that Liverpool fans they haven't turned on him yet, and I don't think they will, you know, for a little while. But you know, goodwill in football is not endless. I think there will come a point if these results keep on coming that there will be questions asked, and you know, he's at the moment the club and the hierarchy are right behind him, but it's obviously difficult to stay behind a manager if they just can't win games. So it is a really decisive week, and I think just to add as well with what the guys were saying about the excuses and things like that, you know, I feel a little bit of sympathy for Slot in the sense, you know, I've been at a lot of his press conferences, both last season and this season, and actually I don't think his demeanour has been particularly different. I think when you're winning games and when you're losing games, the positives that, you know, last season about him being honest and giving tactical insight and things like that are now being interpreted as, oh, he's telling the opponents how to beat him. And so it's very difficult. You know, Ruben Amorim has been through it, Mikel Arteta has been through it. When you're not going through the best patch, everything that you say gets dissected, and I think that is maybe what he needs to be conscious of, because he's maybe creating headlines where it would be better to just maybe keep a little bit quiet, I think, at the moment.
No, he's not going anywhere. Arne Slot's not going. He could lose the next 3 games. He's not going anywhere.
But he has to win that next
Liverpool
game.
really act in a sort of knee-jerk. They really have the kind of knee-jerk reaction to bad results. And the online fan base, I wouldn't give a toss about any of them. The actual fans that go to the game, the match-going fans, the ones with common sense, can see how good a manager he is. The problem is he's got to find a way to figure this out. It's not injuries that are meaning Mo Salah's not playing well. It's not injuries that he selected Alexander Isak over arguably the best and most dangerous player since the Community Shield, and Hugo Ekitike. Alexis McAllister hasn't played particularly well. He's had an injury, hasn't looked himself. Gravenberch hasn't quite looked himself. Szoboszlai's been shifted from pillar to post. The whole Wirtz thing's been well publicised. And I go back to it. The back four, the 2 centre-halves, the real fulcrum of that back four haven't really played well this year. Van Dijk and Konate have struggled to control a back four that has changed full-back positions, whether it be Frimpong or Bradley or Szoboszlai or Kerkez. And, you know, there was even a point you thought, well, you know, maybe we'll have to bring Andy Robertson back in full-time to give Kerkez a rest. But Andy Robertson, I mean, he played yesterday, but he played for Scotland a couple of weeks ago and he really struggled. So that's not an easy one, just to say to Kerkez, you know, I'm going to just give you a little bit of a rest to try and get your confidence back. He's having to throw him in and he's struggling, the young man. I mean, he can't wait to pass the ball 5 yards. And you can sense it in the crowd. And when a player senses it in the crowd, he becomes even more nervous when he gets on the ball. And it's even worse for him when your skipper is giving you a grilling. So it really is a difficult time. And they face Villa on the weekend, who will just sit back like a cat waiting to pounce. That's what Aston Villa will do. And guess what? That's been one of the Achilles heel of Liverpool this year, is when they've been pressing and when they've been attacking, when they've coughed the ball up, they've been counter-attacked so easily that teams have been able to get at their goalkeeper and at the back line. So I think Aston Villa are one of the worst teams they could have been facing at home this weekend because of the contrast and styles of play. Is
it a must-win at the weekend then, Beth, against Villa, considering the results so far?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Craig. I think even if he lost the next three, I think it would be difficult to see a world where he goes, just purely because of the credit that he's got in the bank and for all of those reasons I mentioned earlier. So in one sense, you could say, you know, it's not a must-win in terms of his future, but I think in terms of just changing the mood around, you know, there was a week last season where Liverpool played all three of these next three teams, Aston Villa, Real Madrid and Manchester City, in the same order in the space of a week, and it was sort of season defining in a way because they won all three of those games without conceding a goal. And I think it was the week that really made everyone sit up and take notice of how good Liverpool were. And you know, I think if they manage to get positive results in those same fixtures this week, then it could be a turning point in the season. If they don't, then it's hard to see how they get out of it. I think the fact that they're at home will be a big boost. I asked Arne Slot last night after the game, you know, do you feel like the pressure is on a little bit more having made that gamble in midweek? And he sort of said, listen, if you're Liverpool manager, the pressure is always on when you're losing games. And he said the support of the fans at Anfield last night was really encouraging, and he feels that will be massive. So Liverpool have had quite a lot of away games the last couple of weeks, which isn't an excuse, but I think the fact that they are now back at home for the next couple could be really useful. And I think it could be a real springboard then if they're able to get a positive result against Aston Villa. They go into that game against Real Madrid then with a little bit more confidence. If they lose that game, then trying to plan to face Kylian Mbappe and Vinny Jr. and Jude Bellingham and all those kinds of players, and Trent Alexander-Arnold, of course, won't sound like much fun at all for Liverpool.